So my name is Stacy Woodhouse. I am the Economic Development Director for Warren County, which is just to the east of us. And I've got the pleasure of serving that community, which my wife and I own a 90-acre farm and have 3 kids and just are living the life. It's a beautiful area. And I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. I was introduced to Tom Rue by Christy Van Auken from the Research Triangle Foundation about a year ago. And I'm so grateful she made that introduction. He's already making a difference in our community and has funded some of our events. Tom has an amazing amount of experience in the entrepreneur space, and if I read his accomplishments, we'd be here all day. So I'm going to name a few of his accomplishments, and then I'm going to tell you what I think is the coolest thing about Tom Rue. First, he's the CEO of the NC Idea Foundation and gives away hundreds of thousands of dollars to entrepreneurs every year. Before his current gig, he led the Kauffman Foundation education program, and they have a $2 billion endowment. He was Chief Marketing Officer of Jumpstart. He started and sold many of his own businesses. Tom has spoken at the Vatican, the United Nations. He's been quoted by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes. And now you're thinking, well, those are pretty cool things. Like, what else could this guy do? He's Superman. The coolest thing about Tom Rue is that he loves people, and he loves to help people. And when Tom's telling a story about a community or a business that is doing something neat or winning and prospering, his eyes just light up. And you can tell he loves what he does every day. And that is very important to me. And what Tom does every day is help entrepreneurs achieve their dreams. Please welcome Tom Rue.
It's always so strange to be backstage and hearing somebody say nice things. You have to resist the temptation to look around and say, who's he talking about? Hello, everybody. Thank you for braving that wintry weather. I know it was a harrowing drive for myself, but somehow I pushed through. In case you haven't noticed, I don't speak like somebody that's a son of the South. I am one of those Yankees from Ohio. And where I come from in Northeast Ohio in particular, right along one of the Great Lakes, it's affectionately referred to as the snow belt. So a storm that produces anything less than 8 inches isn't even worth talking about up there. But I have learned this in the 4 years I've been living here. Snow must really trigger y'all to eat French toast, because the milk, bread, and eggs disappear at the mere mention of snow. So I don't know what it is with French toast, but all right. So thank you all for the opportunity to be here. Somebody saw fit to put me behind the microphone, so I have to take a second to establish my bona fides. I have, as Stacy mentioned in the introduction, I spent probably the first 20 years of my professional career starting, growing, selling companies, and the last dozen or so years trying to help people around the world do that. Because I saw firsthand the economic impact, the empowerment that entrepreneurship has for people. I also have to, I'm going to vary for a second because I see Hillary sitting here. Hillary Sherman from the EDA, who just spoke beforehand, y'all don't know how lucky we are to have her advocating for the state of North Carolina. I've worked with EDA officials all over the country. Few are as respected or as engaged as Hillary is. So yes, I've had the privilege. When you work for a big foundation that gives away a lot of money, you get 50 free IQ points, and you get invited to really cool places. And what it helped me in all those travels from the UN in the top left, to Greece in the top right, it's Denmark on the bottom right, that's the Prince of Denmark at a Creative Cup. What I've learned in all these experiences is there are certain universal things about entrepreneurship that apply regardless of where you are. But what's not universal are the difficulties, the challenges, the assets, the resources, right? That's not commonly shared. I'll give you an example. At the time I was up in Greece, I learned working with organizations there that they have an interesting, because of the dire economic circumstances, they have an interesting phenomenon that if you should fall behind on your taxes, your company taxes, a government official can show up and you can either bribe them and tell them come back in 3 months, or you can pay an exorbitant fee, and barring one of those two options, you can just say, I don't have the money and I can't bribe you, and they haul you off to jail right then and there. I was doing this work in Brazil and in Rio with the State Department, as a matter of fact, part of a delegation, and I kept hearing this statistic. 96% of our startups succeed. 96. We have a 96% success rate. And I'm scratching my head and I'm thinking of all my own failed attempts. I'm like, how is that even possible? Well, it comes to find out, you cannot shield yourself from corporate debt. So, we can, when we start a company, establish an LLC, we can make a yeoman's effort, a good go of it. And should we fail, unfortunately, we do have the option of filing, bankruptcy and walking away from it. It doesn't have to destroy your life. In Brazil, you cannot do that. So what happens is you have companies that exist in a non-legally established fashion for upwards of 20 years before they officially register, file. And if you're going to let somebody have a startup for 20 years, yeah, you should have a 96% success rate. So that's just to give you some perspective. So what do we do? What does NC IDEA do? Out of curiosity, who's heard of NC IDEA? Show of hands. A few. Good. So we are an independent private foundation. And despite having NC in our name, we're not affiliated with the state in any official capacity. I say independent private foundation because there was no Mr. or Mrs. so-and-so that bequeathed the money to the foundation. So we have an autonomy through our board governance and staff intent to decide what we should prioritize on. And the shortest way I can say it is that we exist to help people in North Carolina realize their full entrepreneurial potential. A lot of what we already heard today, and you will hear later, is around the more established practices of attracting firms and growing manufacturing and all those standard economic development practices, which definitely and obviously have a place. But I'm going to talk more about the front of the pipeline, the kind of grow your own, if you will. Entrepreneurship is what I'm here to talk about. So that's what we exist to do, and we do that through a couple of things. Most notably, we help entrepreneurs through a couple of programs and grants. So when I say differentiate, programs are we run curriculum. People come to sessions, and we do things like labs, which is a 4-week accelerator program where somebody like yourself has an idea for a company and wants to figure out how do I turn this idea into a business. Those are our programs. And we have one also called SOAR, which is specific for female founders, because you may find this hard to believe, but there's a few differences. And it's not quite as easy for women in startups, especially if they have to go and raise money. So we have programming that's nuanced for that. The other side of the house, we actually write checks. And when I say we write checks, I mean we give away money. Competitively, twice a year through a cohort, we do what's called the Seed Grant Program, where we will make $50,000 grants, and micro grant programs, where we will make $10,000 grants. And that is, as the word implies, grants. It is money gifted for the purposes of advancing an idea or your business to becoming something with greater economic impact, which we measure through revenue and jobs created and things like that. I am unaware in all of my work that I've done around the world in this capacity, I'm unaware of any organization that gives away as much money as we do for this purpose. A lot of organizations exist, but typically will make loans, or they make an equity investment. So you get 50 grand from them, but they then get 5% of your company, for example. We don't do that. We act like we take equity because it's very competitive. You can imagine, well, let me do a little test here. If I was going to stand up here and say I'm giving away $100 bills, would any of you get out of your seat to come and get one? Yeah, I think a few might, right? So we do have a very competitive process. I don't mean to imply that it's free and easy. Well, it is free, but not easy. And our demand is greater than my supply. I don't have unlimited. We deploy roughly $2.1 million a year across all of our programs. And I can tell you 4 years into the job, if we had it, I could 2 to 3x that. I could double it at a minimum easily based upon merit. Because the ideas are there. The potential, entrepreneurial potential is here in the state. I'm just limited with the resources we have to do it. The other thing we do is we help organizations help entrepreneurs, because we can't do it alone. We're headquartered in Durham. We serve the entire state. I do about 40,000 miles a year on my car, and I love and appreciate invitations to come to events like this one to preach the gospel of entrepreneurship. But we need force multipliers. You know, Stacy mentioned the work he's doing there in Warren. He took advantage of a program we have called the Engage Grant Program. So this is something that if you're an organization, an individual, you don't have to be a nonprofit, you can be a for-profit economic development organization, you want to do an event, something that's going to promote entrepreneurship, we have $5,000 for you. So some of the easiest money you'll ever apply for, and we've made over 100 of those grants across the state. We have ecosystem partners that we have made grants between 50 to 250,000. We have 24 of those, and again, the whole notion there is building this network of people that can start helping more people succeed entrepreneurially. So what's been our impact since we've started? We've done all right. We've helped create about 2,500 jobs. Companies that we have funded or supported have gone on to raise over $300 million in follow-on funding. And there's other cascading benefits to that that I really won't get into now, but it's not insignificant. I mention this because there's a lot of conversation. A prior speaker talked about economic trends that are happening. I know the president's put out a new budget that I believe is predicated upon a 3% GDP growth. The last time, or at times, when the U.S. has historically been above 3% GDP, startups in the nation have been close to 600,000, and we're not even close to that. So if we want to say and have this goal to achieve this level of growth, economically speaking, as a country, we are going to have to figure out a way to start and grow and support more startups in this country. That's just the way math works. So how do we approach what we do, and why do we do what we do? I like to use data. I heard Hillary mention data. I too am a data fan. You know, this is my unfortunate habit. My wife likes to catch me at 2 in the morning with the laptop in my lap in our bed, and instead of surfing things that I shouldn't be surfing that require clearing my browser history, I like to read white papers. And I like to understand what's happening in the space, and in particular what's happening in the great state of North Carolina. So one of my favorite data sources for that is the Economic Innovation Group. They're a bipartisan economic think tank out of DC, and they are the publishers of the Distressed Communities Index. Because North Carolina is a very interesting state, which I'm going to demonstrate here in a second, because it's not an equal experience. There's not parity across the state as to what level of comfort and economic engagement and economic upward mobility that everybody gets to enjoy. And that's very important to understand for a host of reasons. Their Distressed Communities Index uses these scorecards, so percent of adults not working, housing seat vacancy rates, change in employment establishments, no high school diploma. And so where do we stack nationally? North Carolina, we're in the second to last quintile. Not exactly bragging rights, right? So if we're a state of 10.5 million, somewhere around that, 22.8%, I'm gonna just say it's 25 so I can do the math. It's about 2.5 million people that are living with extreme economic distress. If you want to get a little more granular about it, this is what it looks like on a county by county level. Pretty jarring, isn't it? You know, I like to say, depending upon who I'm speaking to, you know, if you see that dark red band that kind of goes up to the east, that pretty much follows 95, right? And this, to me, is one of the most telling slides that I get to share with people, because it tells a story that fellow citizens are living very different lives in this state that we share. If you wake up every morning and go to bed every night in one of those dark orange counties, your optimism, your sense of your potential, your confidence in the institutions that you rely on are dramatically different than if you are having the good fortune to live, work, and play in one of the blue counties. Or I should say live and work in one of the blue counties, and then typically you run off to a red county to play, right? Because we all enjoy the rural countrysides and whatnot. In particular, the Kerr-Tar region, you've got it all. That's why I did the little blowout on the bottom. I mean, you've got blue, red, yellow. So there's a whole mixed bag here. And I want to make and impress this point because many of you are in roles to do things to help each other succeed. And I think before you first try to impress upon others what to do, you need to understand yourself, what the plight of everyone is. Too much of what I see in this kind of work is predicated upon one very singular focus from my vantage point, right? I mean, by virtue of my race and gender, I already have a certain lane. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon your perspective, mine is broader than most because I'm a white man, right? But if we're truly going to build an economy that works for everyone, we have to be aware of this, and we have to be intentional about being more inclusive around it. You know, the other thing for me that it really reflects is human potential and engagement. Why do I really get to champion entrepreneurship? It's because it's about people living lives of their full potential and fulfillment. Out of curiosity, how many people here are employers? There's a few of you. Here's an interesting study that Gallup has been doing for almost 30 years now. There's over 1 million people that participate in the survey. Only 35% of the workforce is actually engaged in their work. And Gallup defines that as people that show up every day working with the best interest of the company in mind. Okay? Only 35%. 52% are not engaged. These are your 8 and skate. These are the TGIFers. Right? These are the people that will, on the shop floor, walk over the piece of trash on the ground instead of picking it up. And if you really want to get angry, 13% are actively disengaged. And that is unfortunately defined as they show up every day and do something deliberately against the interest of their employer. When I've spoken at workforce development conferences, and there's a lot of employers, you can really tell the business owners that have 40, 50 employees. I actually pretend that they are making mental lists, oh yeah, Sam, that guy, he's in that 13%. And as funny as that is, it's also sad, right? I feel sorry for the 52 and the 13. You know what we call the 35%? Those are your employees that have an entrepreneurial mindset. They behave, even though they wouldn't use this language, but they behave like owners in the business, not employees. And for those of you who've ever grown a company, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They take a vested interest in the business. What's it look like for our kids? All right? I don't think there's huge population inflow to every county in the Kerr-Tar region, is there? What's keeping them here? A recent study came out, showed that it's 76%, the one on the left, 76% of students are reporting as tired, stressed, and bored We also know from Gallup, from an engagement standpoint, in the 5th grade, life is the way it should be. You're going to still believe that you can be an astronaut. But by the time they get to be seniors, we beat it out of them, right? Education is broken. So how hopeful are they when they're graduating from your community, and if they don't go to Carolina or State or that other little blue school in the triangle, right? I have to say that because I'm on the board at the Keenan Institute of Private Enterprise. Sorry. Look at this. If you need the cherry on that unfortunate Sunday as it relates to our youth, it's this trend line of the generation of our kids having a better economic outcome than their parents before them. Right? I know the earlier speaker spoke about the serviceable debt and it being one of the lowest rates it's ever been. He's way more educated than I, so I defer. I'm sure that's true. But I think what it glosses over is a different debt tsunami, especially our young people are dealing with, and that's student debt. It's 1.5 trillion or some just god-awful, obscene amount of money. When I was at the Kauffman Foundation, this was already years ago, we were already seeing student debt having a dampening effect on entrepreneurship. If you all think that entrepreneurship is about the 22-year-old, graduate from State, it's not. The fastest growing demographic in entrepreneurship today is 45 to 65. And is it any wonder if students are graduating with a mortgage but no house to show for it? We have to consider that. So what I will say, just to keep this lively and happy, because I know I'm getting everybody excited, let me just say that I have the observation that if these trends and rankings continue to slide, we're going to continue to see more polarization, right? As long as the state remains so different and so glaringly so, our tribalism is not going to get better. I just heard on the way in on the radio that apparently this is an election year. Who knew? Right? The lack of civility, the inability to understand each other, it's because we're living such different existences. We have different expectations. We have different frames of reference. But now I'm going to turn this around, right? Because we got the solution. It's called entrepreneurship. Because Republican or Democrat, everybody's wired to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody has the same access to resources, don't have the same networks to support. That's where organizations like mine have to come in to try to level that playing field. 3 years ago, I got the board to agree and the staff to approve that we put down a marker that said no less than 50% of our time, treasure, and talent will have to be in service to communities of colors, female, and rural communities. I'm also happy to report we're crushing those numbers. We're close to 76% on that. So you have to be intentional. It doesn't happen by accident, right? And you can't just open the door and say, well, we invited everybody and nobody showed up. So let's talk about entrepreneurship. I'll use data from my alma mater, the Kauffman Foundation. And this is very fresh, new data. It's kind of good news, not so good news on the 4 categories. So I'm going to start with the good news. The startup early survival rate. That means, companies surviving beyond the first year and then eventually beyond the 5th year standpoint. And we have dramatically gone up in just 1 year's time frame. Even though the trend line doesn't look like a huge hockey stick up, keep in mind this is relative to all other states. Because I'm afraid to tell you, other states know that this entrepreneurship stuff is pretty good too. So everybody's scrambling, so every year our relative rankings change based upon how other states are doing as well. But from last year, this is I think like a 10-position upswing, so that's great. What that tells me, what I infer from that is, support organizations are making the effort to help people. So it's not just good luck, we wish you well, here's a ribbon cutting. They're getting the support, the money, the mentoring, the networking that they need. The next one is opportunity share of new entrepreneurs. This is creating a business by choice. Especially those of you who live in rural communities, people, they probably don't even use the entrepreneur word to self-describe, but they are what we would refer to as survival entrepreneurs. That is corrected out of this statistic. So this is just people deciding, like, yes, I have an opportunity, I want to go off and do that. There's where we rank on a national basis, 7th. And again, with all the great educational institutions we have, it's not surprising. I mean, entrepreneurship curriculum is very much in vogue, and so we are hopefully, inspiring enough students to at least consider taking that plunge. That's the end of the good news. Job creation. One of the things that startups do, and again, data from Kauffman, is that all net new job creation in the country comes from startups, companies less than 5 years old. And if you think about that for a second, it kind of makes sense, right? If you're the CEO of GM, your shareholders demand greater efficiency. Namely, how do I produce more stuff with less people? How do I increase productivity, right? When you're a startup, all you have are employees. That's why they're such a great engine. That being said, in the state of North Carolina, we're not exceptionally great at the job creation part of that. And again, we're working with Keenan Institute on a research project to understand why. So take this with a grain of salt. It's preliminary, but I think we're thinking is because we have a disproportionate number of people going into tech startups, which are not super heavy in job creation. They're also not really great at wealth creation that's dispersed. It's one of the reasons why after I took over, I made sure that the board and I were in alignment that we weren't going to be interested in just funding 2 kids from Duke that have an app to fill in the blank. Because the cascading benefit, even if they are successful, is very limited, right? But if we can help start and grow a company in Person County that's going to be a $5 million company doing whatever, it's probably going to generate 25, 35 jobs, right? And from an economic impact standpoint, that's very material. And then lastly, the rate of new entrepreneurs, just period, whether it's survival or otherwise, we're actually below. The national average across the board is 0.3%. So 3 out of every 1,000 people in a population starting a company. This is one of those inverse, slightly perverse statistics because the economy is doing so well, relatively speaking, in North Carolina. So the notion that I need to go start a company or that I would go start a company, I get to go to the great country of Mecklenburg from time to time, and their entrepreneurship ecosystem. There's several great organizations trying to do really good work, but there's no center of gravity for it like you have in Durham and Raleigh, right? I mean, they're always fighting with each other. Who's the most entrepreneurial? Doesn't really matter, but there's center of gravity for sure. There isn't, and when you think why there's a lack of urgency, it's because they have so much big business, hiring people at really good salaries. You have a great quality of life. Why am I going to go off and start a company? Why am I going to do that hassle? Because in case you haven't heard, it isn't exactly easy, but it's worth doing. So that's kind of how we stack up on the entrepreneurship front. I want to be a little more real and personal on it and explain why this drives what we do. And I want you to think about somebody's lifespan. Okay, that's the blue line. Zeros, we're born. And over the course of our life, if we're lucky, we have opportunity. We graduate from high school. Maybe we go to community college or college. We get a job. We get married, have 2.4 kids, pay our taxes, right? And we can have a decent life. Think of that used to be the American dream, right? And then for many, they aspire to have this kind of altered trajectory. Where can we have kind of an engagement point where we can help somebody, go from the blue to the green line and experience. That might be that you started a company, created 20 jobs, and a very good income for yourself. And as I already stated before, the unfortunate reality for a lot of people in this state is the bottom one, right? It's because they were born in the wrong zip code. The color of their skin poses challenges. The lack of credit and other things. Maybe we become judicially involved. In the work that I do and I've seen, as I said, a lot of emphasis is going from blue to green. And if you kind of imagine what that trapezoid or whatever the correct geographic term would be, a geometric term would be, over the lifespan, yes, you make a change, right? But imagine if we could do that. Because I think that bigger area is more gooder, to use a technical term, okay? That's why we focus and emphasize that we do on inclusivity. And for us, what that really boils down to is a mindset. It's an entrepreneurial mindset. It's a life skill. And I want to bring you close with a sample of, playing out as we speak, right? Everybody knows at the moment there's a shortage of truck drivers. If anybody ordered anything online for this past holiday season, chances are an Amazon truck or a UPS truck showed up at your driveway once or twice during the season. So yes, there's a big shortage. The big retail companies that, need to deliver stuff are trying to figure it out. There's even community colleges offering truck driving classes and certificate programs. But at the very same time, this reality, exists in the market. You have the largest, smartest companies in the world working on autonomous vehicles. Again, that was referenced by an earlier speaker, right? Gone will be the days that we have our own cars. You're just going to order a self-driving car. So what if you are, you lost your job at the factory that moved, and you thought, okay, well, I'm going to go retool, and I'm going to become a truck driver. If you're doing that absent the presence of mind or anticipating, you're going to fall farther and farther into those red counties. And we're going to continue to be more bifurcated as a population. In my parents' generation, if you could not speak, if you couldn't read, you were illiterate, right? And if you were illiterate, your upward economic mobility was impacted. There's only so much you could do by being illiterate. In today's world, the equivalency of being illiterate is the inability to unlearn and relearn skills. Being illiterate today means you don't have the ability to look into the economy and see where you fit, or if you don't fit, what you need to do to fit. That's what we have to empower people with. And I'm talking from, kindergarten all the way through retirement. That's the new world order. And that's why we emphasize an entrepreneurial mindset for doing that. I think the way we're eventually going to do that is by starting from the bottom up. It's got to be a reform of education. And as the World Economic Forum said, it's not enough to treat entrepreneurship as this one-off thing, that we just think of as like, oh, that's, Clem. I saw him back there somewhere. He's crazy enough. He's going to go do something that's risky and new, but that's not me. We are all hardwired to be entrepreneurial. We have to help people let that out. So with that, thank you. If there were thoughts or comments, or if you want to take issue with anything I said, there's my email address. And I think Stacy's going to come out now. You need this guy?
Have a seat right here.
No, I don't know why they separated us so much. All right, if you help me with the technology out here real quick, get this thing back open.
I promise I showered today.
All right, while we're getting that working, I'll ask the first question. Hopefully you guys have sent in some questions here. If there's a country that's doing, is there a country doing entrepreneurship really well that you look at and go, they're just eating our lunch and we should more mimic what they're doing, or we need to catch up? Is there somebody doing this extremely well?
Yeah, the Israelis are given a lot of credit for being kind of a world leader in entrepreneurship. Although I would say there's a huge asterisk with that designation because they have a lot of mitigating factors that are driving that need to be entrepreneurial, not the least of which staying in existence, right? It speaks to something I alluded to earlier when I was talking about the lack of a center of gravity in Charlotte. In places where I've done economic development predicated upon entrepreneurship, like in Detroit, actually the Rust Belt, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, these industrial bases that hit rock bottom, right? Here it was when tobacco, left. Up there is when steel and rubber, went overseas. And it's weird, almost perverse, but when you're in a location where there's crisis, there's just hit rock bottom, it kind of is a clarion call for everybody. Everybody rallies around it. It's really strange that it's harder to get focus, attention, interest, and energy when everybody's doing pretty okay, right? Because there's no urgency. So I think that's the case for Israel. They have this urgency. So a lot about cybersecurity, physical security, a lot of tech. I still think we are, the world leader in promoting entrepreneurship, but I hate to be a bearer of bad news. I think we're becoming very, very complacent. And I'll give you kind of an anecdotal example of that. The last program I launched at the Kauffman Foundation is an entrepreneurship curriculum program called the Ice House program. And we took that all over the world to promote it. It's being taught on 5 continents right now. It's been translated into multiple languages. It's actually growing faster in Latin America than it is in the US.
Wow.
Here I struggled to get a community college to offer the course to a pilot class of 24 students. It's like maybe a $5,000 commitment. Could take a year or two to negotiate that. We went down to Mexico, Tec de Monterrey, which is the kind of the Stanford of Mexico. Their beta test was 10,000 students, $600,000 contract, and it was negotiated and done in less than 90 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Someone's asking, do you have a speaking schedule posted that they can know when you're speaking next? They liked it so much.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. Hit me up on email or just go to our website, ncidea.org, sign up for our newsletter. We'll spam you twice a month, and you'll see all of our events and everything that we're promoting. I should mention, I alluded to the seed and micro grant cycle, the $50,000 and $10,000 grants. We're currently open. They close March 2nd. So if you're interested, if you think you could take advantage of some free money, go to our site. Please, please, please do yourself and us a favor. Read the eligibility, read which one you should apply for, because it is very competitive. We get about 200 applications per cycle, and we'll give 6 of the 50s and 15 of the 10s.
So I want to stress about the Ice House because sometimes people get confused because you talk a lot about entrepreneurism and they think that Ice House is just about somebody that wants to start a business. But Ice House is much more than that. I mean, you've deployed this in schools. I think I heard prisons. What are some of the other more aggressive ideas that you've had with Ice House?
I think one of the coolest ones we had was the mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico, put, I think it's upwards now of 700 city workers through the program. And again, it's empowerment. The program is not about how you write a business plan, how you raise money, MVPs, lean canvas, all this stuff you've probably heard in different programs. This is, I say tongue-in-cheek, this is the course I wish I had taken before my first probably 3 startups, because it took me that long to figure some stuff out. So this is about perseverance, critical thinking, problem solving, commitment to community. I say it's a life hack. We have to give it a label, so we call it entrepreneurship, but it's really a life skill. And with it, it can empower anybody to be more. And that includes somebody that is a line worker in a factory to somebody that does want to go off and start a business.
All right, next question from the audience. Do you have any suggestions for an educational system that might promote entrepreneurship? I'm assuming that a big key role would be played by Ice House, but beyond that, is there a system of entrepreneurship that schools are adopting that would help them in the entrepreneurship role?
Sure there are, and there are many. I think one of the things I've had to learn since coming to North Carolina with the program is it's a crowded field. So there are several programs, throughout, whether it's in the public school districts or the community college system. Certainly universities have their own flavor of it. I will say this, including my own, it's somewhat derivative. There's a lot of similarity. So pick one, run with it, because that's the more important part of this, is actually doing something. And then look for other experiential opportunities. Up north, junior achievement was a really big deal. I don't know that it is here yet or not. I know of a couple. I know somebody that's running a great chapter out in Charlotte. I don't know if the Rotary get involved, but anything that really makes kind of a porous boundary between the classroom and the community is what I would emphasize. Getting students out, demystifying the process. There is so much stigma and baggage, and it's unnecessary around entrepreneurship, like it's some kind of mythical.
Right.
You're smirking because you've lived it.
Right.
That it's some sort of mythical thing. It isn't. The best thing we can do, I've got, knock on wood, 3 now finally graduated children, and all 3 of them don't have a dime of student debt, and it's partially because they grew up in a house with a crazy dad who was starting and selling companies every 3 to 5 years. So they were entrepreneurs.
Right.
All 3 of them were doing entrepreneurship, generating income from about 10 all the way through their college experience, right? It's just a mindset. Unfortunately, that's not a common experience for kids to grow up in that kind of environment, so we have to figure out a way as a society to open that up for more children to feel that way and grow up with that mindset.
I've heard you give a stat of, if you take a certain amount of people through Ice House, you know that a certain percentage are going to really hit it big. What are those numbers?
So it's 1%. So we have put a stake in the ground to get 100,000 people in the state of North Carolina through the program. And we know from data that about 1% will do something, many people will do many things worth doing, but 1% will do something that's going to have a large economic impact. And by large, I mean generate a decent amount of jobs and revenue and raise capital and basically strengthen the economy. Just 1%, but 1% of 100,000 is 1,000 companies. If we did that and got 1,000 companies of that kind of economic impact in the state of North Carolina, we would top the nation. I mean, that's ultimately my long-term goal with NC IDEA, is to make North Carolina the best state in the nation to start and grow companies. And that makes our economy more resilient, right? It makes us more attractive to continued investment into the state. These are the things that are going to make a better future, a life worth living, better for everybody.
So that goes good into another audience question. So somebody wants an example of one of the 1% companies that has come through NC IDEA.
Oh, we've had several. Most of them that have had the final impact had it through an acquisition. So I'll tell you one of the oldest ones, Transloc, an overnight success, 14 years in the making. Started in Durham, just a couple guys doing some stuff. went through all the evolutions of AI and basically like a radar technology, and just last year got acquired by Ford, this little company out in Detroit you might have heard of. It ranges from that to, so that's kind of the traditional tech, to Sandbar Oyster Company. This is one of my favorite grantees because it came through my very first cycle after I got hired, and a lot of people thought, oh, the new guy lost his damn mind.
Oyster company.
Right, like an oyster company. Why are you funding an oyster company in Beaufort, all right? And like everything else, the story is a little more nuanced. Come to find out, the founders of the company was a commercial fisherman who goes hand to God by the name of Clammerhead. He makes
Of course.
Bert of Bert's Bees look like a conservative person wearing a tie. And then his partner is faculty at UNC. And they invented and patented a substrate technology, which basically is a glorified way of saying they take netting, thick netting. It's made out of jute, and they get it from Bangladesh, and they run it through a sluice box that is, you know how like candles are made by dipping a wick in wet wax? Well, they take this netting and they drag it through wet cement and some other secret sauce that's in it, and so it hardens, like in a sheet, right? And if you come to find out, if you take that material, that substrate, and you put it out in estuaries, it's really good at building reefs where historically ones have been lost or don't exist, because oysters love to cling to it, right? And so fast forward now, almost 4 years since they got a grant from us, they're bidding on 7 and 8-figure contracts now for shoreline restoration, because there's another thing that's happening, at least I've heard a rumor, it's called, I think, climate change. And so sea levels are rising, and there's huge threat to, big parts around the world. And this technology of theirs is going to be very conducive to battling against that. And so there's just that upside, and then, oh yeah, when they go in and do a deployment of, say, 10 miles of shoreline, they have to hire a lot of people, because what they do is they show up on site and do production on site. Yeah, that's temporary labor, so these aren't going to be $60,000 salary jobs, but they're still, injecting money into the local labor pool, and in particular, they're focusing on working with veterans.
Gotcha. So we're between you and your lobster that Diane has for you, so we have 2 more questions. So someone asked, how do you attract entrepreneurs to a community? And so are there things that say Henderson or Vance can do to attract more entrepreneurs?
I know this is not good form, but I should actually give you that question. I don't know how many people in the audience know Stacy or his background or his story, but this is your prototype, a very successful entrepreneur, right, who has chosen to live here, has the means to live anywhere in the country, and probably most countries, other countries, but chose here because of quality of life, affordability. I don't want to say all the reasons why you chose, but
yeah, I mean, for me, it was proximity to a major metro area for the various different businesses we have, and quality of life was a big thing. In this area, north of Raleigh, if you look at quality of life and cost of living, it has it in spades. And you're right next to a growing metro area. I mean, it's all those things. I never invest in anything if it's, I never buy anything if it's not an investment. So this, I bought my forever farm, but also it was in the path of growth and all that good stuff. But, to me, first you have to have a place that people want to live. You have to create an environment that's welcoming, and in Warren County, we have that in spades. I kind of walked into that. But then you have to have the resources that the entrepreneurs need. I mean, not all entrepreneurs are, Mark Zuckerberg. They have to have resources and have help. And Vance Granville has a small business center where they can get a lot of that help. And real quick shout out, on the March 12th, we're actually hosting at Vance Granville Small Business Center the Ice House training. And so there'll be, I think, 25 slots available.
oh yeah, it's free to anybody that takes it, by the way. We're picking up that tab.
And so that's a large expense the NCID is picking up. And I'll give a shout out real quick. one of the events that Tom, the NC Idea, funded last year for us was our small business conference in Warren County. And it was $5,000. We got to bring in a national speaker. It was the first African-American grandmaster chess player in history. And this gentleman goes all around the world speaking. He's a motivational speaker. And we went from having the largest attendance being 60 at our small business conference, we had 180. The whole high school football team showed up. We had youth, we had high school students, superintendent and her staff. And we had half the adults that came to that signed up wanting more information about Ice House and wanting to take the Ice House training when it's here. So that's a huge, huge thanks to Tom for that we could not, for a small community, $5,000 is huge. The speaker, when I called the speaker, and I called his agent actually, I called Maurice's agent, I said, how much does he cost? I want to get Maurice here, how much does he cost? He said, $6,000. I said, well, I got 5. Will he do it for 5? And he did. He did. We put him up at Lake House and got him here. So that's all we've got for now. I thank you so much, Tom, for coming and speaking to us.
I want to just finish the question. Find the Stacy Woodhouses in your community. Because I will tell you, when entrepreneurs get to a certain stage in their life where they've had a certain amount of success, they're not worrying about the paycheck, day to day, they're not sweating that. They are some of the most generous people with their time and their willingness to help and engage. All you need to do is you need to reach out and ask them to get involved. And so if you want to understand how you can activate that more in your communities, find the Stacys, come up with an excuse to get together, to hold an event. That event was one of the coolest that I've attended. We've funded over 100 of these so far, right? And no disrespect if there's any in the room, but usually it's like, here's Bob Smith, owner of the car dealership, and he's going to give us a inspiring tale of his rising. I know I'm being silly, but to have this kind of different, the first black grandmaster champion, and the demo that they did. The guy played another nationally ranked player blindfolded in a timed game. He had 8 minutes to do it. He was blindfolded and crushed him.
Beat him badly.
And the point of that whole demonstration was the power of the mindset, right? It's shifting the thinking. If I have anybody in this audience thinking a little differently, then I've done my job. So figure out a way to catalyze that kind of thinking in your communities, and then it'll start happening. But you have to keep at it. The secret sauce to doing this is that there is no secret sauce. It's 5 yards per carry. It's showing up every day, having events, getting people together, asking how to help, find the resources. You just got to work for it. You can't wish for it. You got to work for it. Thank you.
Please give Tom a big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Awesome. Appreciate that presentation. I'm Harry Mills. I'm the Economic Development Director for Granville County. And I'm between you and food. So I promise you I will be brief. You get an economic developer up to share with folks and they talk for long, but I'm going to be really brief. I'm not going to tell you that we're home to the #1 cosmetics company in Revlon, or #1 shingle company in Certainty, or #1 retread rubber in Bridgestone Firestone. I'm not going to tell you none of those things. I'm not going to share that we were able to have a great year and expand or bring existing 6 different entities this year, including stealing a company from, not stealing, but enticing a company from California to relocate to Granville. Not going to tell you those things at all. But I do want to be serious and say this. Everything that all the presenters have shared are true and where we need to be. And there's one other piece I want to add, and that's the leaders of our community, the government. I'm very fortunate to have an awesome board and awesome support. And so I get charged with the prayer for today. But before I begin, I'll let you know 2 things. I'm Episcopalian, so I looked in my good prayer book for a prayer. And I was thinking about my board, and I figured I'm going to combine the 2. So this is about the board, Granville County Commissioners, and all the leaders of Granville County. and the Episcopal Prayer Book. Please bow your heads with me. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send down upon those who hold office in our state, counties, cities, and towns the spirit of wisdom, charity, and injustice, that with steadfast purpose we may faithfully serve in our offices and jobs to promote the well-being of all people. Guide us during this conference to remember that as we lift up our communities with business and industry growth, and as we lift up your people with employment, we're doing as you have instructed us to do, to love and serve all your people. Bless this food for the nourishment of our bodies and our bodies to service to you. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord, we pray. Amen. The food is out in the lobby. Please feel free to grab a box lunch. You can eat in the lobby or in the atrium. And thank you for attending.